The Galactic Council sat in their grand chamber, a vast room filled with towering beings of various shapes and sizes, their eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the waterlogged world below. The planet was thought to be uninhabitable, a swirling mass of violent oceans and relentless storms that had wiped out every species that dared to settle there for centuries. It was a graveyard for every colonization attempt, yet there it was, a ship from Earth, its hull glinting against the storm clouds as it breached the atmosphere of the forsaken planet. The Council had received reports just hours earlier that a human vessel had touched down, and to their astonishment the humans were alive. And well, they weren't struggling against the fierce waves, they weren't succumbing to the toxic rains or drowning in the suffocating depths of the ocean. The humans were thriving. They had set up a base on the planet and appeared completely unbothered by the very element that had destroyed so many others. How was it possible? The Council demanded answers. How could a species as fragile as humans survive on a world that had consumed the most resilient of beings for centuries? The debate started quietly at first. Low murmurs filled the chamber as the members of the Council tried to process the information from their own xenobiologists and field agents. The questions grew louder as the realization spread across the room that the humans were not just surviving, they were thriving. How could any species exist on such a planet and not be overwhelmed by its fury? The Rellan representative, a tall and slender figure with 6 arms and pale blue skin, stood up first. Their voice filled the room with an eerie calmness. If they are immune to water, what does that mean for the rest of us? What does it mean if this primitive species can adapt to environments that should have destroyed them? Their voice was laced with suspicion. They looked toward the human delegation, who had been invited to the Council's chamber for this very meeting. The humans stood there under the harsh lights of the chamber, seemingly unperturbed by the growing tension in the room. Commander Alexis Harrison, the leader of the human delegation, met their gaze, her arms crossed over her chest, a look of quiet confidence on her face. While the Council members whispered in the background, her presence was almost a quiet defiance, a stark contrast to the growing sense of panic among the others. She had seen the reports and knew the implications of their arrival on this water world. She was prepared to speak, but she waited calmly for the right moment as the room simmered with growing concern. The Dronic representative, a being with multiple insectoid legs and a chitinous exoskeleton, clacked its mandibles together sharply in agitation. What is the meaning of this? They demanded. Do they believe that a species like theirs can ignore the fundamental forces of nature and survive? What if this is a trick? What if they are hiding something, a virus, a weapon that will destroy us all? We cannot simply allow them to go unchecked. The Council's chairperson, a being of glowing light and transparent skin, nodded solemnly, acknowledging the weight of the accusations and fears that were being raised. Their voice resonated through the chamber, calming the growing tension. We must understand what is happening here, they said before turning to Commander Harrison, who had remained silent through it all. They nodded toward her. Speak your case. Explain to us how your species can survive what no other has. Alexis stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the diversity of the beings that sat before her. A brief moment of silence passed before she spoke, her voice clear and strong. We are humans. We adapt, we survive, and we thrive where others falter. We do not fear water or any other force of nature, because we have learned how to bend it to our will. The chamber grew silent as Commander Alexis Harrison's words echoed through the room. The tension in the air was thick with suspicion and uncertainty. The Council members exchanged glances, their skepticism growing as they considered the implications of what they had just heard. How could a species so young, so seemingly fragile, have developed such an extraordinary ability to endure what no other race could? The xenobiologists, who had once proudly asserted that no life form could thrive in the waters of this planet, now questioned everything they had learned. The Council's first response was to test them. They would not take the words of these humans at face value. They would subject them to trials. They would push them to the brink to see if this so-called immunity was real or just a clever ruse, a demonstration of their superior technology, or perhaps some unaccounted-for genetic mutation that could be controlled. The human delegation was escorted to the station's central lab, where a massive pool had been set up designed to replicate the brutal conditions of the ocean world. Below, a holographic image of violent waves crashing against jagged rocks. filled the air. The hum of the machinery signaled the beginning of the test. Without hesitation, Alexis and her team stepped into the pool, the water already boiling with the artificial storm's intensity, their bodies submerged completely, yet there was no sign of distress from any of them. They stood there undisturbed as waves crashed against their chests, their breathing steady, their faces relaxed as though they were simply taking a stroll in a calm stream. The council watched from above, their eyes narrowed in disbelief and frustration. This test was supposed to break them. This test was supposed to prove that humans were not as invincible as they seemed, but the humans showed no sign of discomfort, no gasps for air, no struggle as the water swirled around them. It was as if they were not even affected by the water at all. The Rallan representative leaned forward, a sharp and pointed expression on their face. "They are deceiving us," they hissed. "It must be some trick. No species could survive like this." Yet their eyes could not deny the evidence before them. Next came the second trial. A series of toxic rainstorms were simulated. The water droplets in the air, infused with corrosive chemicals, designed to break down the toughest of exoskeletons and peel away the most resilient of skin. Alexis and her team stood in the open, their bodies exposed to the acid rains, their clothing disintegrating under the assault, yet their skin remained unharmed. The rain slid off their bodies as though it had no effect at all, their hair damp, but not burned, their skin intact. The Kilora representative, who had been silent up until this moment, stood with an almost imperceptible tremble in their voice. "It is not possible," they murmured, their voices filled with both awe and fear. Their homeworld was a water planet teeming with life, but also fraught with dangerous chemicals in the water that could kill any creature that was not adapted to it. "We have seen so many species perish here. It is not possible for them to withstand what we cannot." But once again, the humans stood tall, their faces unwavering, no signs of pain or discomfort, no reaction at all. The council members exchanged nervous glances. The truth was undeniable. These humans were not like anything they had ever encountered. The final test came when a chamber was filled with a simulated ocean current designed to drown even the strongest of species. Alexis and her team were submerged again, their bodies carried by the powerful currents, pulling them deeper into the depths. Yet again, the humans defied all expectations. They fought the current, effortlessly pulling themselves to the surface and swooning with ease, as though the water was nothing more than air. It was clear now there was no deception, no trickery. The humans had mastered water in ways no one could comprehend, and as the final trial ended, and they emerged from the water, their eyes still steady, their breath, even the council, was left speechless. As the humans emerged from the water, their bodies dripping but undisturbed, the chamber remained eerily silent. The council members exchanged tense glances as the realization began to settle in. This was not a trick. This was not an illusion. These humans were impervious to water in ways that defied everything the galaxy's greatest minds had ever concluded. The xenobiologists whispered among themselves, unable to explain how such a phenomenon was even possible. The Rallan representative was the first to break the silence, their voice cold and sharp. "We must understand how this is possible," they demanded. "How could they survive what no other species can? What is the secret behind their biology?" Their voice echoed in the chamber, and all eyes turned to Alexis, who stood in front of them, calm and unflinching. Alexis met their gaze without hesitation. "We don't have a secret," she said simply. "We're humans. We adapt. We survive. We've learned to live in places where others can't, to survive where others fall." The council's eyes remained fixed on her, none of them satisfied by her simple answer. They had hoped for something more, something they could control, something they could replicate for their own benefit. But what they faced now was a mystery, something that no amount of scientific inquiry had prepared them for. The Dranok representative, their many legs clicking nervously on the floor, stood up, their voice trembling with suspicion and fear. "What does this mean for us?" they asked. "Do we simply stand aside while your species grows stronger, while you spread across worlds? We've seen what happens when species rise too fast," they said with an unsettling growl. "We've watched empires crumble and galaxies burn by those who seemed too powerful to defeat." Alexis's gaze hardened, but she held herself steady. "We are not here to conquer. We are here to coexist," she said. "Our survival doesn't mean your destruction. We offer you our knowledge, not our domination." The room grew tense once again as her words hung in the air, Could they trust her? Could they trust humans when so much of the galaxy had come to fear their very existence? The chairperson of the council, a being of translucent light, whose form seemed to shift and shimmered like liquid, took a deep breath, their voice gentle but firm. "We need to know more," they said. "We need to understand if your species can truly survive without harming the balance of our worlds. There is too much at stake. If this power is left unchecked, we cannot allow a species that can defy the very forces of nature to run rampant." The Kilora representative nodded, their aquatic features shimmering with uncertainty. "I do not speak for my people," they said, "but my world suffers from the same forces that have threatened your species for centuries. We've seen what happens when life cannot adapt. We've seen entire ecosystems collapse beneath the weight of a world that demands too much from its inhabitants." Alexis nodded, understanding the gravity of their words. Her voice softened. "We understand your fear," she said. "We've seen how harsh nature can be, but we have also learned how to work with it. We've learned to shape it, not to control it, but to coexist with it. We offer you our knowledge, not to use as a weapon, but to protect your worlds, to help you adapt to the challenges your species face." The council was silent for a long moment as they processed her words, the weight of their decision bearing down on them. They could not ignore the potential threat humanity posed, but they also could not ignore the possibility that humanity's strength could be the key to saving countless worlds from the harshness of nature. For the first time in history, a species had appeared that could challenge the very laws of biology, and the council was left to decide whether to fear or embrace it. The council chamber buzzed with murmurs of uncertainty as Alexis stood before the members, her words lingering in the air. They were torn between the unknown potential of humanity's capabilities and the risks of trusting a species so fundamentally different from their own. Some members still whispered about the possibility of a trick, a hidden weapon that humans had yet to reveal, but the Kilora representative spoke again, their voice softer now, tinged with something like hope. Could it be true? Could humanity really offer solutions to the crisis their worlds faced? The chairperson spoke at last, their voice commanding yet calm. "This is unprecedented," they said. "Humanity has shown resilience that defies our understanding. But we must know more. We cannot accept their offer blindly. We need to understand the full scope of their abilities. We need to know if this power can truly benefit us all, or if it will lead to disaster." Alexis nodded in agreement. She had expected this, but she also knew that she was here for a reason. Humanity's place among the stars was not to conquer or control, but to adapt and help others adapt too. It was a message that had been hard-earned through the trials of their own history, and she was determined to prove it to the council. She knew that the first step was to offer something that none of the galaxy's other species could. The humans agreed to present the biological research behind their immunity to water and the science that had allowed them to thrive in places where no one else could live. It was a breakthrough that had taken centuries of trial and error to perfect through evolutionary medicine, genetic modifications, and an understanding of their planet's most extreme environments. Humanity had developed a unique capacity to survive, even thrive, in the most unforgiving conditions. A team of human scientists, led by Deverelina Waters, a biologist known for her work on human adaptability, began to speak with the council's xenobiologists. The data was presented, a detailed explanation of how humanity's ability to resist water was not just a genetic anomaly, but a result of centuries of research and evolution. Humans had learned to manipulate their own biology, to regenerate tissues, to resist toxicity, to adapt to environments where no other life form could even breathe. The Exarchs, who had been observing in silence, stepped forward, their insectoid eyes blinking with curiosity. "This is incredible," they said. "We have long struggled with the waters of our homeworld. We have watched as entire generations perished to the planet's volatile seas. If your people can truly help us adapt, if we can survive in the depths, as you do, we could finally thrive. We could reawaken our planet." The room fell quiet as the other representatives absorbed this new possibility. Could humanity's breakthrough actually help restore worlds that had once been considered beyond? Saving the Dronic representative, who had been skeptical, seemed to soften their stance. "We have always feared what we could not control," they said, but perhaps it is time we learn to adapt. As you have it is not control we need, but cooperation. The Rallan representative nodded slowly. Perhaps we can learn from each other and offer humanity the respect they deserve. For the first time since the humans had arrived, there was a shift in the Council's mindset. The fear that had once clouded their judgment began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative understanding. Humanity's ability to adapt was not just a weapon to be feared, but a gift that could help those who were struggling. The humans had proven that they were not simply survivors, they were also healers. Alexis knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges and more skepticism to overcome. But as she looked around the chamber at the shifting expressions of the council members, she could sense that something had changed. They were no longer viewing humanity as a threat. They were beginning to see them as partners, and for the first time in a long while, Alexis felt hope for the future of the galaxy. As the discussions in the council chamber grew quieter, the atmosphere began to shift from uncertainty to cautious optimism. The news that humanity had the knowledge to help transform dying ecosystems and save planets from environmental collapse had spread like wildfire. The Council now had to grapple with the idea that these humans, once seen as a small and insignificant species, might hold the key to solving problems that had plagued entire civilizations for millennia. But even as hope flickered, skepticism still lingered like a shadow over the gathering. The Rallan representative spoke again, their voice laced with unease. "What guarantee do we have that this ability of yours will not be weaponized?" they asked, their glowing skin pulsating with a rhythm of tension. "Your power to thrive in deadly environments. It is too great a risk to place in the hands of a single species. If humanity were to decide that it wished to rule the galaxy, who could stop them?" There was a murmur of agreement from several other council members, the fear that had been stoked since the humans first arrived flaring back to life. But Alexis Harrison stood firm, unflinching. She had heard these concerns before, not just from the council, but from her own people as well. "You are right to be cautious," Alexis began, her voice calm but resolute. "But I can assure you that humanity's goal is not to conquer. We've seen what that path leads to, and we refuse to follow it. Our mission is to collaborate and help, to lift up those who are struggling, not to dominate them." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the council seemed to waver between distrust and the growing desire for cooperation. Finally, the chairperson of the council, the being of shifting light and energy, spoke. "We must proceed carefully. If humanity can truly aid in the restoration of dying ecosystems, it could bring about an era of unparalleled cooperation or destruction. We must see this plan in action, with proof beyond words." And so, the Council agreed to a bold new proposition. Humanity would share its knowledge of water resistance and ecosystem restoration with the rest of the galaxy, but only on the condition that it would be monitored and regulated by a joint galactic task force. The hope was that the knowledge would be used for the collective good, but the fear of its potential misuse remained, always lurking beneath the surface. The Orcs, whose once thriving planet was now a drowned wasteland, were the first to volunteer. Their homeworld had been devastated by unpredictable storms and rising tides, leaving entire cities submerged and their people scattered. They had lost all hope of ever reclaiming their world. But now, with humanity's help, they saw a faint glimmer of possibility. The Orcs offered to be the first to implement the human method of adaptation, to help restore the waters of their homeworld and revitalize their ecosystem. The Kalora, too, spoke of their planet's dying oceans, the acid rains that poisoned their water and their people. They too hoped that humanity's knowledge could be their salvation. The Dranach were more cautious, still unsure of whether they could trust the humans to keep their promises, but they agreed to allow limited cooperation on a small scale. Their species had learned long ago that trust was earned, not freely given. As the meeting came to a close, the representatives of the Galactic Council found themselves faced with an unprecedented decision. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The arrival of humanity had ignited a new spark of hope across the galaxy, even as it threatened to upend the delicate balance of power that had held for centuries. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive the harshest conditions. It was whether the galaxy was ready to embrace the potential of this new, unpredictable species. And as Alexis Harrison left the chamber, her eyes on the stars beyond the station's windows, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But it was a road worth walking, for herself, for humanity, and for the future of the galaxy. In the weeks that followed, humanity's involvement with the galaxy took on a new shape. The task force was formed, a conglomerate of the most advanced species across the stars, assembled to oversee the implementation of humanity's water adaptation technologies. The Council had agreed to this arrangement as a way to ensure that the delicate power of humanity's knowledge would not be misused, and that all projects would be monitored closely by representatives from various species. But even as the plan began, the challenges of trust remained. Commander Alexis Harrison found herself traveling with a team of human scientists to the Exarch's homeworld, where the first major test of their technology was to begin. The planet had once been home to lush forests and thriving seas, but decades of environmental instability had drowned their cities, leaving only desolate shores and deep, toxic waters. The Exarch's people, once proud and strong, now clung to the last remnants of their civilization, scattered in isolated colonies along the coastline. They had reached out to humanity for help, and Alexis was determined to prove that they could deliver. As the human team arrived on Exarch's, they were greeted by a delegation of Exarch's leaders, their forms resembling giant insectoid creatures, their skin colored a mixture of dark reds and yellows, indicative of the still-present effects of their poisoned atmosphere. Alexis could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the defeat, and the uncertainty that weighed heavily upon them. They had tried every method, every technology available to them, but nothing had worked. They had seen their people perish, their lands drown, and now they had pinned their hopes on humanity. Commander Harrison, one of the Exarch's leaders, a towering figure with multiple insectoid limbs, greeted her. "We are ready. The water, the storms, the poison, they have ravaged us. We have nothing left but hope in your people." Alexis gave a somber nod. "We won't fail you," she said simply, though she knew the weight of those words. Humanity had never faced a challenge like this. Not on this scale. Not with so much at stake. The human team, led by Dr. Elena Waters, immediately set to work, preparing the restoration process. It would begin slowly, with small-scale experiments to test the water's reaction to the genetically engineered bacteria humans had developed. These microorganisms were designed to break down toxins, purify the water, and help restore the balance of the ecosystem that had once thrived. The first few days were filled with intense scrutiny. The Exarchs watched closely, their eyes suspicious but hopeful. Alexis and her team worked tirelessly, deploying the microorganisms into the contaminated waters, carefully monitoring their progress. The transformation was slow but steady. The waters began to clear, the toxicity levels gradually decreasing as the bacteria consumed the harmful substances. But the greatest test would come when the larger body of water was treated, when they would finally see if humanity's knowledge could truly restore life to the oceans. Days turned into weeks, and despite the initial successes, doubts began to creep into the minds of the Exarch's leaders. The changes, though promising, were slow. Would it work in time? Could the planet be saved before more lives were lost to the rising tides? The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, the pressure mounted on Alexis and her team. One evening, as the sun set over the newly treated waters, Alexis stood alone on the shores, watching as the once toxic ocean now shimmered with a hint of life, albeit faint. Dr. Waters joined her, a weary but hopeful look in her eyes. "It's working, Alexis," Elena said quietly. "We just have to give it time. The ecosystem is healing, but it won't be overnight." Alexis nodded, but the weight of the task at hand pressed heavily on her. Time is something they may not have. We've given them hope. Now we have to make sure we deliver." Behind them, the Xerx delegation watched silently, their emotions guarded but hopeful. This was only the beginning, and as the days stretched on, Alexis knew the road ahead would be difficult. Yet for the first time since arriving, there was a glimmer of optimism. Humanity had given the Xerx something they hadn't had in years: a chance. Weeks passed since humanity's intervention on Xerx, and while the signs of progress were visible, the challenges were far from over. The planet's once toxic oceans had started to show faint signs of life, but the full scale of restoration was slow, and that Xerx had grown impatient. Alexis Harrison and her team knew that time was not on their side. The Xerx were watching, waiting, and many of the Council's representatives were still skeptical of whether humanity's efforts would bear fruit in time to truly save the planet. One evening, as Alexis stood overlooking the newly restored shorelines, she felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. Her communication device buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Waters. "Alexis, you need to see this." Elena's voice crackled through the speaker, urgency clear in her tone. "We've encountered something unexpected." Alexis immediately made her way to the makeshift lab where the human scientists were monitoring the progress of the restoration efforts. As she entered the lab, Elena stood over a holographic display of the ocean currents, her face drawn with concern. "What's happened?" Alexis asked, scanning the data. "The bacteria are doing their job," Elena said, pointing to the chart. "But there's something else in the water now, something we didn't expect." The display shifted, showing an anomaly in the water's chemical composition. There were traces of a new form of toxin, one that was resistant to the bacteria humanity had engineered. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. "Where did this come from?" Alexis demanded, her voice sharp. "We think it's a byproduct of the chemical imbalance in the ocean," Elena said, her voice tense. "It's evolving faster than we anticipated. The water's ecosystem is adapting to the bacteria, and it's generating new toxins to fight back." Alexis frowned, feeling the weight of their predicament. If the water was evolving new toxins at this rate, there was a real possibility that the bacteria could become ineffective, and all their progress could be undone. "We need to act fast," Alexis said, her mind racing. "Alert that Xerx delegation. We're going to need their cooperation if we're going to neutralize this new threat before it gets out of control." Within hours, the Xerx leaders were informed and gathered with Alexis and her team in a new emergency meeting. The Xerx, clearly anxious and frustrated, stood before her, their insectoid features tense. "You promised us salvation," one of the leaders, a tall figure with dark red exoskeleton plating, growled. "You promised that your people could save our world. But now we face a new enemy, one that may be even worse than the storms. Your bacteria are not enough." Alexis met their gaze, unwavering. "We will find a solution," she said firmly. "We will adapt, just like we did with the oceans. We've faced challenges before. This is no different." The Xerx leader snorted, a sharp sound like the clicking of mandibles. "Your confidence is impressive, but we are dying. You said you would give us hope, but now we wonder if you are simply stalling for time." The words stung, but Alexis refused to be deterred. "I understand your frustration, but I assure you, we are not stalling. We will use every resource we have to fix this." The team worked tirelessly through the night, analyzing the new toxins and studying the evolution of the water's ecosystem. The human scientists, aided by the Xerx experts, developed a new compound, a synthetic enzyme that could counteract the rapidly mutating toxins. But the process was risky. There was no guarantee it would work, and the window of opportunity to prevent a catastrophic collapse of the oceans was growing smaller by the hour. As the dawn broke over Xerx's horizon, Alexis stood with Dr. Waters on the beach, watching as the first samples of the new compound were released into the water. The team had done everything they could. Now, it was a matter of waiting. "The future is in the hands of the water now," Elena said quietly, her voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. Alexis nodded, her mind still racing with the weight of the task at hand. She had hoped this would be the breakthrough they needed. But now, all they could do was wait, and hope that humanity's resilience, its ability to adapt, would be enough to save the Exarchs, and perhaps the galaxy itself. As the hours dragged on, Alexis and her team waited in tense silence. The beach where the compound had been released lay calm, but beneath the surface, the waters were a battleground. Would the enzyme work, or would the toxic strain continue to mutate, stronger and more resistant to humanity's efforts? Alexis could feel the weight of the Exarch's leaders' gazes upon her as they waited for a sign, a shift in the water that would indicate success or failure. By mid-afternoon, the first signs of change began to show. The water, once murky and thick with toxicity, started to clear. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in color, the dark clouds of poison retreating as the compound worked its magic. The Exarch's leaders watched in stunned silence, their insectoid eyes narrowed. But the first glimmer of hope was impossible to ignore. Alexis stepped forward, her voice steady, but filled with the gravity of the moment. "It's working," she said, her words measured. "We've done it." Dr. Waters, standing beside her, confirmed the data with a nod. "The toxins are breaking down. The enzyme is neutralizing the threat. The balance is returning." The Exarch's leader, who had been most vocal in his skepticism, approached cautiously, his multi-limbed form moving across the shore with an air of disbelief. He dipped one of his appendages into the water, testing it for himself. The soft ripples in the water were now calm and clear. He withdrew his limb, a sense of wonder flickering across his features. This is a miracle," he muttered, his voice trembling for the first time. "You've done it. You've saved us." Alexis allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but her work was far from over. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Now we need to work together to ensure that this restoration lasts. We'll need continued monitoring and cooperation to prevent further imbalances." The Exarch's leader nodded gravely. "We will do what is necessary. You have proven your worth. Humanity's strength lies not just in survival, but in its ability to adapt, to help." As the Exarchs began organizing their people for the large-scale restoration, Alexis's comm device buzzed again. It was a message from the Galactic Council. She knew the eyes of the entire galaxy were upon this moment. The task force's success could be a turning point, not just for Exarchs, but for every species that had hoped for change, for a way to coexist with the harsh realities of the galaxy's environments. The chairperson of the council spoke through the comm, their voice somber but filled with acknowledgement. "Commander Harrison, we have been monitoring the situation closely. The data from the Exarch's restoration efforts is being transmitted to the central hub. You have proven that humanity is capable of achieving what we once thought impossible." Alexis took a deep breath, the weight of her actions heavy on her shoulders. "Thank you. But this was not just humanity's doing. It was a collective effort. The Exarchs, the Calora, and all those willing to work together for a common goal." There was a pause on the other end of the comm, as though the council members were considering her words carefully. "Agreed," the chairperson responded. "We cannot ignore the implications of what has transpired here. Humanity has offered more than survival. You have demonstrated a vision of hope for a galaxy that has long been divided." Alexis felt a surge of emotion she hadn't anticipated. Hope, the same word she had used to describe their mission. The council was beginning to see humanity not as a force to fear, but as a partner. And in that moment, Alexis knew that the path ahead, though fraught with uncertainty, would lead to something greater than anyone could have imagined. The Exarch's leaders, who had been listening intently, exchanged looks of mutual understanding. Their world was healing, and their people would thrive once more, thanks to humanity's gift. The galaxy, it seemed, was on the cusp of a new era, and as Alexis watched the rising sun illuminate the now clear waters of Exarchs, she couldn't help but believe that this was just the beginning. Together, they had forged a future where cooperation and adaptation triumphed over fear, and humanity's place among the stars was no longer in doubt.